Hi guys, it's Crystal coming to you from the past to talk to you about a bunch of quilt tops that I have very recently made. This was the last of the batch that I made. I ought to have looked it up beforehand, but this was a free pattern called something like Jelly Roll Sizzle. It is, I think, from either the Fat Quarter Shop or maybe it was free from Moda, I'm not really sure. This baby size, which is about 3 feet square, it uses 18 jelly roll strips and a little bit extra for the pinwheels, and then I added a border because my blocks were slightly small and I thought I better add a little bit of more size to it. The only thing really of note was I decided to try to do mitered borders. So I watched a couple of videos. I mean, there's no good reason to do a mitered border with this one, but I wanted to learn it and thought this would be a good way to try learning. So I watched a couple different videos on how to do it. Neither of the videos felt as clear to me as I would have liked them to have been. I think they turned out okay, but they're not perfect. I don't know. Maybe that's as perfect as it gets. I'm not sure. Anyway, I watched these two videos and I tried both methods, and I mean, I don't know. I guess it's okay. Quite a while ago, I'm gonna say in December of 2020, our very own Mary was making a bunch of quilts using panels, and I mentioned having 3 mermaid panels that I didn't quite know what to do with. And so she came up with 3 different patterns for me using the exact quantities of fabric that I had. And this was the first of the patterns that she came up with. The 3 panels are all mermaids, and so there's a sort of mermaidy fabrics. I say mermaidy, oceany fabrics. So you could argue this is net or maybe scales. And then there's sea urchins. This panel and all these fabrics are by a artist named Cori Dantini. And this is one of her go-to prints. They're just, I think she calls them seed stripes, maybe? I'm not sure. This was the first of the patterns. This is the second pattern that Mary came up with for me. I did add a border to the outside just to make it a little bit bigger, but it's otherwise as she sort of planned it. Basically, my original plan for these for the panels had been to make a larger quilt because I really like mermaids, but then when push comes to shove, I don't really need a mermaid quilt. This one also has the sea urchins, 2 different prints, and then this one, which is sort of like scenes with slightly different mermaids than the ones that are in the panels. Kind of like the sea turtles. There's dolphins, but somehow, here's a dolphin. Somehow all my dolphins wound up getting cut in half. Oh, no, not all of them. There's a full dolphin here. And here is the final mermaid pattern. I actually only used 2 of the 3 patterns that Mary made for me. The panels are a very weird size, and I had to cut them to really odd sizes to make them fit in the middle, and my brain just could not somehow process the math. And so I wound up reusing this first one, which used oversized borders that you then trim down to the center square, and I could handle that so much better. So that's why I wound up reusing this pattern. So this is a very old UFO of mine, or it was a UFO that was from a quilt along called the More Modern Block of the Month. Basically, each month you would get a block that was 3 by 4 and used a variety of half square triangles and just like background squares, essentially like solid squares. So I had made the first 5 blocks, which encompassed actually only January through April, and then plus a bonus block. And so the whole idea of it was that you would have 12 blocks plus 4 bonus, and with the 4 bonus it would make, just essentially a slightly larger quilt. But I stopped making it, and I didn't really love the fabrics, which are a combination of 2 different lines. I don't totally remember the names. One is called Badda, which I think this one comes from. And then this one was from a different one. It looks like Gingiber to me, I think. Yeah, I should have looked all this stuff up ahead of time. Anyway, I was combining 2 different charm packs with the Kona Snow background. And I don't know, it just didn't really speak to me. So what I wound up doing was making 8 blocks from the block of the month, and then down at the bottom, the bottom 2 here, all the way across, I just randomly put together using however many leftover half square triangles I had. So like this one, can I get my finger in there again? This one right here is the other half of this half square triangle up there. So I had a bunch of leftover halves and then some squares and stuff. So I just pieced them together into something so that it would make it a reasonable size top. So the last quilt didn't actually use all the leftover squares from those original 2 charm packs. So I didn't have a ton of them. I want to say there was 20 odd squares, which doesn't really go that far. But I remembered that I had the remnants of a couple charm packs of dots and gingham squares, and so I went and fished those out as well. This one, essentially what I did was I made a grid of, like a checkerboard grid, using all of the squares that I had, and then I filled in white patches with any remaining colored squares that I had, and then anything that was still blank I just put more white, the Kona Snow, I guess, into. So this one's just a real mishmash of different stuff. There's ginghams on like a large check scale, and then also a finer scale like this. There were the big dots, and then the slightly further away dot, or further apart dots, and somewhere these ones, which are smaller still, and then all the random leftovers from those 2 charm packs. So things like this and the strawberries and so on. I mean, it looks like it was all more or less meant to go together, I hope. In my last video, I talked about making quilts using the new Nordic line of fabric and some random solid Kona charm packs that I had. This was the first of the quilts that I made using those. I still don't love them, but you know, they are what they are. I suppose they're cute enough, especially for kids. They do have bunnies and geese and pigs and ducks and things like that on them. So these 2 quilts were disappearing 9-patch quilts, and I gotta tell you, I found them so tedious to make. I didn't think that it would be as tedious as it turned out to be, but I got really tired of doing it really quick. So here's the final new Nordic quilt top. This one, I just took all the leftover squares, put them together, and made, what is this, a quarter square triangle? Hourglasses. I made hourglasses using it. Ooh, I'm being eaten alive by mosquitoes. So this one, you can tell there was a ton of leftover brownie beige squares. So I tried to put them so that they would make like stars in the patchwork. I don't know, there was a lot of blue and a lot of brown left, so I kind of tried to spread it around as much as I could. And here's my final quilt top. This one's the biggest of all of them. It's a little too big to get on camera where I'm recording. I think it's also my oldest work in progress. Not most of these weren't works in progress. This was a work in progress, or a UFO, I guess you could call it. So a long time ago, I made all these blocks using a layer cake of Adventures fabric from Amy Ellis. They were done using a pattern that used to be available on the Moda Bake Shop. I don't know what it was called, but it was some sort of method for making I guess, a quarter log cabin. And you cut it out in this really peculiar way that I messed up. I mean, I only messed it up once, but because I messed it up once, that block up there and then the one down here in the corner ought to have had quarter log cabins in them as well. But I had cut them wrong, and so I didn't really know what to do with the pieces, and I toyed for a long time with the idea of putting this all on point, and then did nothing with it. So rather than mess around with the idea of putting it on point, I just found similar-ish toned fabric to put in the corners and have called it good. I quite like this one. I think it's good for a boy, which is not always the easiest thing to do with fabric. Anyway, I really like this one. I think it's quite cute.